Okay, so let's go across to the nonlinear animation editor. And you can see at the moment, the action, so that's the container for that animation we've just created, is in use by the live strip. So this is the strip that we assign to whatever character we've got selected, or whatever object we've got selected. And we can see that as well. If we come into the dope sheet, into the action editor mode, at the top, it shows us here the name of the action that is in use on the selected object. Just the same as it shows here, right? So the problem is, if I take this action off of the selected character, so I've got this character selected, if I press the cross here, and we just look at the action in here, you'll see it's got a 0 next to it. That means the action is not in use at all by Blender. Now, if you leave it like this, and then save and reopen the file, then you're going to find yourself in a fit of rage, slowly turning green, and all your pants and your t-shirt just ripping off. And we can also find these 0 user actions if we go into the Outliner's Data API mode. Under Actions, our action is listed here, and you'll see under Users it says no users. Right. So let's just bring it back onto the main track again, so it's in use by the character. You'll see we've got this little shield next to it. If we click on that, it will show now that there's 2 users. There's the one that's actually using it, and there's a fake one. And the fake one basically means that if I get rid of it now on here, so it's not in use, we've still got 1 user, so Blender won't automatically delete it next time you save and reopen the file. So just make sure, if you don't want to lose your action, you can just add it as a fake user, which you can enable either in here, or you can do it by assigning it to the character again, and just clicking the shield there. Alternatively, if you don't want to give it a fake user for any reason, what we can do is stash it or push it down. So if we're stashing it, basically means it creates a new track that's disabled and locked, and it adds that action onto that track. So this little clip it's created contains the animation we created. So that's the full action. If we undo that, the other way we can do the same thing is just to push it down and then do it manually. We'll disable it and lock it. So it's not in use, but it is saved. It's got 1 user. If we look over here, it's got 1 user there, which is this track. The one benefit of using a stashed action over pushing it down is that the stashed action maintains its link to the original objects. So if you rename any of the bones, for example, that stashed action will still work, whereas the push down action, you'll need to manually rename all of the channels inside of the animation. So there are your options, just to make sure you don't lose your work. I think I'll just make it a fake user, just so that I don't have to mess up the nonlinear animation editor. So I'll just click on this track and delete it. So now I've just got 1 user. Alright, so let's get on with the walk cycle. Now, in this one, I'm going to actually use a combination of inverse kinematics and forward kinematics. We're not going to be doing any swishing. We'll save that for the very last part of the animation tutorial. In this one, the arms are going to use forward kinematics all the way through the animation, and the legs are going to use inverse kinematics. And I'll show you why now. The reason we're going to use forward kinematics on the arms is because it will give us more control over the motion of the arm, allowing us to make more of a pendulum swinging motion than inverse kinematics would allow. So let me just quickly show you an example of that. So I'll just make a quick duplicate and reset both back to the rest pose by going into pose mode, selecting all the bones and pressing Alt-R and Alt-G. Then back into object mode, and then we'll do Shift-D to copy it across. So the back one, the original one, will use forward kinematics, and this one will use inverse kinematics. Right, so let me just add a really simple animation, just an arm swing into this. If we play that back, you see the upper arm is actually moving, and I only really want the lower arm here to swing. So we're not really able to get a decent pendulum motion. It's always going to have a little bit of motion that we can't really control in the other bones that are in that IK chain. Now, if we look at forward kinematics instead on this arm, we need to turn some of these bones back on in the forearm so we can control them. And obviously we need to turn off inverse kinematics, so into the constraint, and we'll just disable this. And then we can start animating with the individual bones instead. Now obviously we want this hand to follow along, so I'm just going to very quickly click on this hand. Under the constraints, we'll add a copy location, and we'll just copy the location to the forearm. So the right forearm in this case, and we don't want it on the elbow, we'll slide it to the tail so it's in place. Right. We'll go to frame 1. And let's rotate this into a similar position as the inverse kinematics one we did. So that's the first frame, and then we'll go to frame 10. Frame 20 actually. And we'll now rotate this one up. So I'm just going to rotate this forearm until it's in the same position as the IK one. But if you look at the difference, we're actually able to get complete control over this forearm without any motion anywhere else. So we've got a really nice pendulum action happening. And that's really useful for all manner of different types of animation. So such as, I don't know, shaking somebody's hand or lifting a coffee cup. You know, the usage is just where FK is more suitable are endless, basically. So always keep in mind that if you need more control and a specific sort of particular pendulum motion, then it's probably better to go with forward kinematics. Now in Blender 4, there's been a bit of an improvement to the IK constraint system, which seems to have introduced a little bit of a visual bug in when we're using a IK that's turned off, and we've also got a constraint on the IK bone itself. So we're using the copy location. Now it doesn't matter, but I just want to show you what's going to happen. So when I play this back, you'll see the hand is jiggling around a little bit. So it doesn't matter because we're not actually using this bone's location in FK mode. The only reason we've got this copy location constraint on it is so that when we flick back to inverse kinematics, the hand is in the right place, just for convenience. Just to show you that it doesn't matter, if we were going to parent something to the hand, we would parent it to the actual hand bone, not to the IK bone. So let me just get this. I'll select the hand bone, I'll come into object mode, I'll get this sword, and I'll parent it to that bone that we've just selected. And let's just move it into place. So if I play this back, you'll see the sword isn't wobbling at all. It's only the hand, it's the IK hand itself. So it's not something to worry about. But if it does bother you, then we're going to look at a technique in a minute for the foot, where we don't actually use a copy location on the foot IK controller. And if you want to do the same on the hand, you can do that. But it's not really an issue. It doesn't kick up any problems in the console, so it doesn't actually seem to be causing any sort of circular reference that can cause any problems. So I just wanted to let you know, just in case you're playing this back in Blender 4 and wondering why you've got all shaky hands. And one other thing as well, you might find that when you manually skip a number of frames, the hand is in the wrong place. So if that happens, just change the frame back and forward and that should sort it out. Alright, so let's get rid of this one now. So the walk cycle. A walk cycle is basically the same as what we did in the first animation. It's just basically a collection of key poses that we string together, and then the character will hit those to achieve the full animation. So what we really need to do is find out the key poses of a walk cycle. And if you do a quick search on Google, you'll find that there are many different key poses that can be used in a walk cycle. Some can have 4, some can have 6, or even more. But we're going to use 4 just to keep it simple. And the 4 we're going to use are contact. This is where both feet are full stride and both touching the floor. Then we're going to have recoil. This is where the feet will impact the floor and you'll sort of lower down a little bit. And then you've got passing, where the foot will pass the other one. And then you've got the high point just before we come down and contact the floor on the opposite side. So basically, the 5th one is just a repeat of the first one, just on the opposite side of the body. And to make things a little bit easier for you, I've created this reference image that you can use. It's in the animating chapter folder in your course content. Frame 1 then, and we'll put the character into pose mode. Select all the bones, Alt-R, Alt-G to go back to the rest pose, So it's automatically keyframed because we've got auto key set still in the timeline. You see we've got that there. And it's still set to the correct key in sets that we had before. So I'm going to go back to the dope sheet. All right. So let's start off with the contact. So where both feet are touching the floor mid-stride, or at the end of the stride rather. So I'm going to start with the right foot behind and the left foot in front. I'm going to go in side view as well, just to make it a little bit easier. But that does make it difficult to select the bones that I want. So I'm actually just going to come across here. And we're going to change this into a 3D viewport. And now I can set the bones in this one. All right. So the right foot is going to be behind. So let's just slide that backwards. And it's coming off the floor because the pelvis is too high. So let's just bring that down until the foot's back on the floor. And we can also rotate this toe a little bit as well. And then we'll bring the left foot forward. And we'll rotate this one on the heel. Maybe about there. Probably a little bit too far. Let's bring that forward a little bit. And now we can take that back up a little, maybe to about here. All right. So I'll just work on the legs initially, and then we'll move across to doing it on the arms. And we've got this little thing here. I don't know where that's come from. Let's get rid of that. I think this is from when we just made the robot. Let's delete that. So back in here, and that's the first key pose. So I've select all the bones. You can see we've got a little keyframe on frame 1. So the next key pose, we'll do one every 10 frames. Is going to be the recoil. So where the pelvis comes down a little bit. So bring that down. And we'll also bring the back foot, we'll bring it forward a little bit and up as well. Now I'll reset that rotation. I think we'll rotate on this instead. And then this one. This will now be flat, so we'll do Alt-R to make it flat. And we'll bring it back a little bit. If we just look at this, that's the beginning. And the next one is going to be the passing. So this is where the feet pass each other. So we'll bring this one forward. Maybe rotate it a bit more. And this one, we'll bring this backwards now so it's past. And we want to make it the pelvis higher. And just bring this one back a little bit more. All right. And then the next one is going to be the high point. On to frame 30. Now we'll take this one across. Rotate it up a bit. And we'll take this foot back now, the left-hand side one. And we'll rotate on the toe. We'll play these back now. Okay, and the next one is going to be the contact point again. So we've already got one contact point over here. What we actually need now is just to copy this one across. So we'll select all of the bones we've keyframed. So that's these feet and the little toe pivots and the pelvis as well. So select all those, and now we can mirror the pose. So right click, and I'll say copy pose, and now I'm going to go to frame 40. And if we look over here, I'm going to choose right click and then paste flipped. So you paste flipped, and now we've got the duplicate of frame 0, but it's being flipped over. So if we play this back, that's frame 1, that's frame 1, and this is the end frame. So basically it's flipped them around. That's how we go. So now we've got all the key poses set up, all we need to do is copy them in a flipped state from 10, 20 and 30 onto 50, 60 and 70. So we'll go to frame 10, keep that selection, right click, copy pose, and then we'll go to frame 50, right click, and then paste X flipped. Go to frame 20, right click, copy pose, go to this one, right click, paste flipped, then frame 30, right click, copy pose, and then we'll go to frame 70, right click, paste flipped. I'll just change the timeline now to be, we'll go with 80 frames. Then we'll take the first one, and we'll just Shift D, drag that across until that's on the 81st frame, so that it's a seamless loop. So move it one frame further than the end of the timeline, 81st frame, and now those legs should be a loop. Let's have a look. And there you go. Obviously the timing is not correct. I'm just working on the key poses initially, and then we'll tidy it up. Alright, so let's move on to the arms now. We've got the feet sorted out. We'll just click home over here. You can see it all. So during that quick demonstration I made previously, where I showed the differences between IK and FK, I already turned off the IK constraint on that right arm, and I also added a constraint for the hand to make it stick to that forearm. So we just need to do the same now on the left hand side, because we're not using IK on either of the arms. So back in the layers for the bones, turn the forearm, this left arm bones back on, the FK bones, and then I'll disable inverse kinematics on this forearm. So we switched across to FK. And then for the left hand, we need to make sure it's constrained to the arm. So we'll use a copy location constraint. And then we'll set the target as the armature, and the bone is going to be the left forearm. And then we'll just slide that to the end. And then we'll make sure we go to frame 1, and we'll start manipulating these arm bones one at a time to match each of these key poses. We'll start with the contact pose. We're going to have to bring both of these arms down. This one and this one. And we'll go into the left side initially. So this foot's back, so this arm's going to be forward. So I'll rotate the upper arm and the forearm. We also need to bring this hand around as well. And rotate it this way. So we need to make this hand into a fist. So we need to make the hand bones, or the finger bones rather, visible in either the bone layers in 3.6 or the bone collections in Blender 4. Then we can select those, making sure we've got orientation set to local and the pivot set to individual origins. And I think I've accidentally selected the hand here as well. Yeah, just need to deselect the hand if you've done that, same as me. And then you should be able to rotate those fingers like that. There we go. And we'll do the same for the hand over here. So select all of these finger joints, deselect the hand, and make a fist on that side as well. And for the other arm, the back one, let's just get this hand in position. So I'll just align the view again with the reference image that I'm using. So the control numpad 3 to go to the right hand side of the character. And then I'll just start manipulating these arms to get those in place and match with that reference image again. I'll do this for all of the reference images all the way through. And then we've got the contact, so we can actually just, on the first frame, we'll select all the bones we've got keyframed on the first frame. Go to frame 0, the first frame. Right click, copy pose, frame 40, right click, and then we'll paste it flipped. And then all we do again is the same that we did before with the legs. We're going to duplicate these across but flip them. But instead of copying and pasting them one pose at a time, I'll select these three, and then I'll Control-C to copy them, and then I'll paste flipped, and they'll paste flipped based on the current location of the timeline. And if we play this back, you'll see we get the same result, but we just didn't have to keep copying and pasting one pose at a time, so it's much faster that way. And to make sure it's a seamless loop, we'll copy the first keyframes for the selected bones, and then we'll just Shift-D to drag it across to the end. And if we play that back, we should now have a seamless loop. At the moment, it's a little bit too upright when walking forward. You'd get a little bit of sway left and right. And usually the sway would happen in the direction of the forward foot. At least when I just tested it did, but I could just be a freak. We'll select the pelvis and we'll go to frame 1. And we'll just add a little bit of sway in the direction of this foot. So be careful you don't lift the toe off the floor here. So just rotate it a little bit, not too much. Maybe about here. And then we'll go to the other foot being forward. And we'll rotate the other way. And then on the last frame, we'll just copy this one across. And put that here. Play this back. So you've got a bit of a sway side to side. I think we'll also get rid of the rotation on the frames in between, because when we keyframed it with auto key, it's automatically created rotation keyframes for us, which is going to basically put it back to vertical too early. So it's leaning across, and at this point it's vertical. At this point it's also vertical, which is not what we want. So I'm actually going to delete all the rotation keyframes for this pelvis bone in between the sway. So delete those, and now we're going to get a nice gentle sway from one side to the other. And we'll do the same over here as well. Probably get a little bit of twist in there as well, so let's just rotate this. So it twists towards the lean. Rotate it a bit. And then we go to this one, and we'll rotate it a bit in the other direction, just a little bit. And then we'll copy the rotation across from this one to the end. Let's try that. So now I'm getting a little bit of twist as well. And then lastly, the head will make sure that always looks forward, so looking where she's walking. So let's go into top view. I'm going to rotate the head this way a bit. Go into front view on this one. There. We'll come to the next one, and we'll rotate it this way. Then we'll copy this one across to frame 81. Play that back. Alright, so the next thing to do then is actually get this character moving along, not just walking in place. And we need to do it in a way where her feet are moving correctly based on the speed that she's walking forwards, so that the feet stay locked to the ground and not sort of sliding around as if she's on ice skates. So let's head across to the NLA editor, and we'll rename this to walk cycle, this action. And make sure we give it a fake user, just so we don't accidentally delete it. I'm going to use the push down function to create a new strip, and that will make the active strip empty, and this one will continue to be used because it's enabled down here. Now, making it into a strip gives us the ability to change the speed of the clip. So under action clip, we've got the playback scale, and we've also got the number of times we repeat it. So if I change this to 0.5, for example, it's going to play twice as fast and end twice as soon, in which case we'll need to repeat it twice as well, and that will fill it back up in the timeline. So if you want this to be a looping animation, you always need to make sure that you've recursively divided by only 2. For example, 1 divided by 2 is 0.5, 0.5 divided by 2 is 0.25, and that will ensure that it always ends in a loopable state, like so. Right, so I'm going to put it back to 1, put this back to 1 as well, and we're going to start animating it so that the character actually walks forwards. So we'll come out of pose mode into object mode. At the moment, we've got no current live action, it's only using the one that we've pushed down. So if we go to frame 1, with this character selected, still the armature selected, we'll press I, and it's going to add a new action for us with a keyframe for the current location. So I'm going to change this to character move, and then we're going to go to frame 10. I'm going to move it forward a bit on the y-axis. Make sure you lock it to the y-axis. So press G and then press Y. Right, so play this back. And obviously the feet are sliding around at the moment. So let's just open up a graph editor. Let's look at the animation we've just put on there. We only need to see the y-axis because we're only animated on the y direction. So I'm going to hide the others. And we also need to make sure that it's a constant speed. At the moment it's set to Bezier. So just press T and then press linear. That'll fix one problem. The next problem is it gets to this point here and stops. So with this channel selected, choose the channel menu and then extrapolation mode, and we'll make it a linear extrapolation, which basically means it's going to continue on infinitely at the same speed. Right, so the speed obviously is way off. What we can do now is go into the side view, choose a location, make absolutely sure you're on frame 1, very importantly. Shift right click to add a 3D cursor to a point where the foot at the front is making initial contact with the floor. Now we'll move forward a bit to frame 10. I'm going to bring this now up or back or down, whichever, depending on your particular scene, until we've got the heel again, just over that 3D cursor. And now when we play this back, it will stick in place. Now it should do, it's not doing a bad job, but we've got a problem with the actual animation itself on the walk cycle, where the feet aren't moving at a constant speed. So just play that back, you see we're getting a little bit of foot slide still. So back into the NLA, we need to be able to edit the keyframes that we've added to the walk cycle. And to do that, we need to click on it on the strip and press Shift Tab. And that means that all of the animation editors inside of Blender will now show the keyframes for that particular strip. And we can actually modify these stashed strips in 3 different ways, which I'm going to demonstrate with a simple cube scene. So I've created this animation. It's got a cube, which has got 3 actions on it. 1 for scale, 1 for rotation, and 1 for location. And each one of them has been pushed down into its own NLA strip. Right. So if I want to edit, say, the rotation, I've got 3 options that I can press Shift Tab like we've just done in the robot scene, which you can actually see in the Edit menu, or if you're in Blender 4, it's the Strip menu. And the 3 options are Start Editing the Stashed action. So that's Shift Tab, the one we've just clicked. We've got Start Tweaking the action, that's the full stack, and then we've got Lower Stack. Now the difference between the 3 is, this one, the Start Editing Stashed action, if I do this, Shift Tab, and press play, we're only getting the effect of the selected action, or the selected strip. So if I press Shift Tab to come back out, we're back to here. The next one is the lower stack. So start tweaking the stripped actions, lower stack. So let's click this one. And now it's going to have the keyframes for the selected strip only, but it's also going to have the influence of the scale in the viewport, just in case it's useful for you to see the effect of that whilst you're keyframing the rotation. So if I play this back, you can see we're getting the rotation and the one below it, or the ones below it if you've got multiple. Right, and then next, let's just come back out of that one. We're still with this rotation only selected. I'm going to go edit, but this time full stack. And now again, we're only going to get the keyframes for the selected one, but the viewport is going to show us the effect of all 3 now, the ones below and above. And there you go. And the one you choose is completely up to you, whatever makes the most sense and will provide you with the information you need in the viewport to help you keyframe. So back to our robot, into pose mode, and we're going to choose one of the feet. Let's have a look at what's happening. Choose the Y location, and I'll just say view, only selected curve keyframes. So whatever I've got selected here is all the only keyframes we'll see. Now this is the Y location, and because we're moving at a constant speed, we need this to be a straight line between the front of the stride there and the back of the stride here. At the moment, we've got keyframes in between which don't have a value that produces a straight line. So that's going to create a fluctuation in speed of that foot traveling backwards. And it's not entirely necessary to do it between the back of the stride and the front of the stride, because obviously the foot will be in the air at that point, so it doesn't matter if it's traveling at one speed. And in fact, if your foot was going further in midair forward than where it lands, then you wouldn't want to remove those keyframes. But for me, it's fine because my foot doesn't go further forward than it lands, so I am going to delete those. So I'll select these ones between the back of the stride and the front of the stride, and I'll delete those. And then for the ones between these are the important ones, between the front of the stride and the back, where the foot's going to be on the floor, we need to select all of these ones and delete them. And now obviously, we still don't have a constant speed because we're using Bezier curves on these keyframes. So select these, press T, and then we'll change that to linear. And now we've got a constant speed between each one. And we'll do the same for the other foot as well. So this one. Change these to linear. Let's have a look if that's caused any problems. So let's just play this back. So it has created a bit of a nasty snap at the back of the leg. You see just there, the leg becomes too straight for inverse kinematics, and that gives us a bit of a snap effect, which doesn't look very good. So all I'll do to fix this is just select the toe at the front, and we'll just rotate it a little bit so that it bends the knee. And now we'll go to frame 40, where the other foot is at the back. And we'll do the same thing, so rotate that about here. And then for the last frame, we need to copy the rotation across from here. And all I'm going to do is actually go to the dope sheet just to make it a little bit easier. And we'll click on selected only, so it only shows what's selected in the viewport. And I'm going to take the first one, Shift D, copy that across the last frame. And then for this one, we'll do the same thing. So, select this one, Shift D, copy that across to the last frame. Now we should get a perfect animation still. And one problem is, just here, we've got a keyframe there for the toe selector. So it's coming down a little bit too quick. So the toe is rotated quite a bit there. And then in midair, it just snaps down really quick and then it goes back across. We can get rid of that problem just by deleting this. We don't need a keyframe there for the toe rotator. So now it's much smoother. It's slowly coming down. And that gives us a much nicer effect. And we'll do the same for this one. So back of the foot, now it lifts up. We don't need this one here. So it'll stay, basically the toe will stay rotated longer and come down more smoothly to meet the foot again, mid-air. There we go, so play this back. And that's fixed those problems. So we'll come back out of editing this strip here, so press Shift Tab. Let's just have a look at what this looks like. If it doesn't start moving straight away, that's a bit of a bug with Blender. Just go back to the first frame, and we'll just press Shift Tab again over here and play back. If it still doesn't work, what you might need to do is just go into object mode, so out of pose mode into object mode. Try that. And we'll try again. Still not working. If the worst comes to the worst, just grab the graph editor and move something. And press Ctrl Z. There we are. And that should fix it. And if we go back into the side view, now we've got everything linear. Go back to frame 1 and move forward a bit. We can now use this Y location of the armature to line it up again with the heel, and it should now be absolutely perfect. As you can see, as we move forward, the foot doesn't move at all. It's completely static with the ground. Let's just zoom out a bit. Well, let's increase the length of the animation as well. Properties, animation length, we'll make it 200. And now it should continue walking indefinitely. Well, for 200 frames at least. And we also need to make sure we repeat this walk cycle strip. Now the animation is a bit longer. So repeat that until it extends beyond the end of the animation. You can see now that's working perfectly. Now, what happens if you want to change the speed of this? Obviously, what you could do is, if you decide, right, I want it to walk twice as fast, let's go 0.5, for example. Now, obviously, it's not going to be lined up anymore when you walk. So all you can do is go back to the first frame, and we'll just repeat the same thing again. So over here, we've still got the 3D cursor in the right place, so we'll just move across a few frames, and we'll grab this, and just move it until it's back in place. And now it should work perfectly. And if you want to be super efficient and not mess about having to change this keyframe every time you want to change the speed of the walk cycle, we can actually do that by pushing this down into its own strip. And then because it's a linear extrapolation, which basically means this clip internally goes on forever, we can just change the clip length inside the action clip settings, so the end time, to be something greater than the length of the animation currently. So let's say 600. This just gives us a bit of leeway so that we don't run out of enough clip if we change the walk speed so it's faster. On this one, we'll add a few more repetitions as well. Now what we need to do is somehow control the playback scale of both of these simultaneously. Now just pay attention that the playback scale of the walk cycle is 0.5 and the character moving is 1. So we just need to make sure that when we do it, we make sure that this one is half the value. Anyway, so with the character selected, the armature, make sure you're in object mode, go to the object panel, and then under custom properties, we'll add a new custom property. Click the little cog, and we'll call this walk speed, and we'll give it a max value, something like, I don't know, 10, and say OK. We'll right click the value, and we'll say copy as new driver. And then for the scale of both of these, we're going to right click and choose paste driver. Same one for this one. Right click, paste driver. For this one, don't forget, we need to make sure it's 0.5, so it has to be half of whatever we've got in the value here. So right click and choose to open the driver editor. And then over here, just expand this a bit. Rather than it being the value of walk speed, we actually want it to be the walk speed divided by 2. So we change it from average value to scripted expression, and at the end of the script we'll just say divided by 2. And then come over here, press the N on the 3D viewport to bring up the item menu, go down to the bottom, under properties, you'll now have access to the walk speed here as well as inside of this panel on the right. So play this back, go to frame 1. If I change this to 0.5 now, it's going to walk twice as quick, and it will still maintain the correct timing because both are being controlled by this one value. So the lower this goes, the faster it's going to walk. Now, additionally, a benefit of this is that we can actually keyframe the speed to change over time. So we'll select this object, and we'll hover over this and press I. That will create us a new action again over here, and we'll call this one walk speed. And we'll go to the last frame and make sure it's the same value. So we'll just press I again over here. And if we wanted to go slower in the middle, we can now just press I over here. Then we can drag this upwards so it's on 1, like this. Now it will walk fast, slow down, while still maintaining perfect footing on the floor. But you'll notice it's faster on the way out than it was initially. So what you'll need to do in that scenario, just to counterbalance that, is drag that last keyframe's value up a little bit so it slows it down.